So when it comes to Ryan Reynolds and the spirit that he is yielding to, and I do believe that it's actually a demonic spirit. Yeah, from like a psychological perspective, I know that there are many very trained and skilled licensed mental health clinicians and therapists that could diagnose him. I am not one of those people, and I do believe that those diagnoses would be valid. I also believe in the psychological, and I also believe in the spiritual. So yeah, he has all the probably a laundry list worth of psychological challenges, we'll call them, to keep it nice. On top of that, he is also, in my opinion, as a believer and follower of Jesus Christ, he is also embodying a demonic spirit. I do not believe things like sociopathy and narcissism are things that really just goes against who we are as humans and our neurobiological hardwiring. We're not made to treat people poorly. We're not made to play the kind of malicious, unkind, rude games that he just seems to get off on. And so he's made he's alluded to the fact and made it very clear that he had a very dysfunctional relationship with his father and da 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 da, and so that makes him a control freak and all of those other things, which does not, again, I love when men and heterosexual men acknowledge the fact that they are screwed up and jacked up and twisted because of things that happened to them in their childhood. And I would also like them to take it a step further to actually change the dysfunctional, harmful behavior that they are doing towards other people, because your past trauma and the way your mom and dad treated you or didn't treat you or showed up or failed to show up for you has nothing to do with the person standing in front of you, and that does not give you the right or the privilege to treat me poorly because of how you were raised. Okay, so that's an aside, not just for Mr. Ryan Reynolds, but for all the toxic, masculine, heterosexual men that think that because they were dealt an unfair hand in life, because the rest of us haven't, right? That somehow excuses and justifies the behavior, and the fact that they are now in the place where they're willing to be honest and to acknowledge it, that we should somehow give them an award irrespective of whether or not they change their dysfunctional behavior that's driving us cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, okay? So all of that aside. Psychologically, he's dealing with some stuff. In the spirit realm, from a spiritual perspective, he is yielding to a demonic spirit that's further energizing this dysfunction. So that ties into a belief that I've always held about children, and he seems to be confirming that more so. And the, going back full circle to the adage that there's no such thing as bad children. Yes and no. Because if a child is introduced to experiences, traumas, tragedies, horrific events during their formative years that they do not in turn receive drastic, immediate interventions with as they're young and as they're in their formative years, and or if a child at a very young age shows themselves to be predisposed to some things. So like, you always have those kids that seem to be predisposed to like treating animals cruelly. Like they're the ones that are like burning the ants on the ground and liking to see like things squirm, and then they seem to get a real thrill out of death, and they're just naturally deceptive and things like that. If you don't catch that with some prayer and deliverance and some therapy and some counseling, if you don't tend to that in a child when they're showing the early signs of that, because from of course the research, it says that around like 4 or 5 year old, the personality, a child's sense of self and the worldview and ideas that they hold and believe about life, money, sex, relationships, and whatnot is pretty much sealed. And if in those years you see that child is showing predispositions towards some creepy, off, cruel, dark things, if you don't get a handle on that in the spirit and in counseling, you're most likely not going to ever be able to change them, and they'll continue to do it. Candace Owens on her podcast talked about the fact that Ryan Reynolds' acting teacher in Canada reached out to her with an email, and more or less, you have to go to her podcast to get the whole story. He was tricking. First of all, he was unbearable. He was a horror to be around. His grandparents didn't want to be anywhere near him. They put him in this acting school because they just needed a place to get rid of him. And by the way, Canada, take Ryan Reynolds back. Please, we have enough demonically influenced and inspired and possessed sociopaths and psychopaths and narcissists on our side of the street. We do not need international sociopathic, demonically influenced individuals. Please take him back. I beg you. We beg you. We don't want them. Maybe you can help him over there. Maybe he's this way because he's just being in Canada. I don't know. And take Blake too. we have enough of her to make her a Canadian, join her in with the whole thing. By the way, his teacher said that he was always very manipulative. At one point, they kicked him out of the class, out of the acting school, because of how awful he was to everyone around him. And the grandparents like, we are begging you, please take this. Imagine grandparents not wanting to be around their grandchild. That's crazy. That's it. Are we just going to pretend like that's not a thing? So eventually, they had him come in. He had to do an apology, and he was crying, and he was sniffling, and he was whispering, and all the whimpering. And I'm just so sorry, and I'm just so sorry. Please forgive me. Da, 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 da. And all the kids were like, "Oh my God, we love him. Take him back." And da 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 da. And so class resumes, and Ryan walks up to the teacher and whispers, "I was acting." Okay, I'm a Harry Potter fan too. And so if y'all know the story arc of Voldemort, for those of you who ain't read the books, first of all, what have you been doing? I don't know how to help you with that. But for those of us who read the book, if you haven't, spoiler alert, Voldemort's the bad guy. Okay? Okay. It takes you back in time to Voldemort's earlier years. And there were signs early on, before he really understood his abilities and how strong he was as a wizard. There was an indication that this man was had very evil inclinations and predispositions. And had his professors and teachers known that that's what he was given to and predisposed to, they never would have taught him magic. And Ryan Reynolds is one of those individuals. He was introduced to events and tragedies that made him susceptible to some psychological disturbances, one, and then opened his spirit up to a demonic influence that he yielded to unabashedly. And it was not addressed. So now, not only does his psychological difficulties have a hold and a grip on his mind, but the spiritual influence that came into him, that he is so readily yielding to, that he is able to embody a very dark a character like Deadpool so seamlessly and effortlessly that there's like, you know how there's no such thing as Iron Man without the actor that acts as Iron Man? I don't know why I'm blanking on his name. Like, you can't separate Deadpool from Ryan Reynolds. That's how much he embodies the character, because the spirit that's driving him and driving his actions, he's so one with it. I don't know if there's any hope for that man. I really don't. Men like that are very dangerous, and if you see them, you need to pray them out of your environment. You need to pray them out of your experience. You need to send them away, because it's not that God can't deliver them. It's not that the spirit can't be. It's just like narcissism. I don't think narcissism is incurable or can't be cured because it can't be cured. Narcissism can't be cured because of the nature of narcissism. And narcissism believes that I am perfect. There is nothing wrong with me. I'm not doing anything wrong. It's everybody else's fault. So by nature, I don't have to change, because what I'm doing is not a problem. You see how dangerous, how awful that is? So the same thing when individuals are introduced to spiritual influence and yield to them so early on in life. If you don't catch that early, they don't have any interest of releasing both the psychological disturbances and challenges and the spiritual influences that they were open to. They're just not willing. So what do you do with those people? Pray them away, kick them out, remove yourself from them if you can. Pray that God creates a way of escape for you to separate yourself from them and their impact, if not physically, because sometimes that's not always possible, definitely emotionally and spiritually and vibrationally. Find a way to separate yourself from them, because those people will kill you. In more ways than one. And you need to put the blood of Jesus, because I have never seen a person like that in real life. And to have a live case study of that is very interesting. So, yeah, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments.